Food waste, we absolutely need to control it. And again, there's some very, very interesting statistics with respect to food waste. Up to 50% of all food grown anywhere in the world is lost or wasted before and after it actually reaches the consumer. That's absolutely incredible when you think of it. Take a look at that number. It's absolutely incredible how much food is wasted from the time it's grown until it's actually served before and after it reaches you and I, the consumer, in a food service facility. Imagine how much better we could do at feeding the world if we were able to shrink that down significantly. Even by a factor of 25%, it would have a very, very positive, very, very significant impact upon feeding the rest of the world. Europe discards anywhere between 30 and 50% of its food supplies. That's a huge percentage, absolutely huge percentage of waste of food that is absolutely wasted on this island and this continent. It's absolutely disgusting when you think it. Food losses in Europe alone equal anywhere between 280 and 300 kilograms per capita on a yearly basis. That is all of these numbers are very significant. Food waste costs in the UK alone cost restaurants anywhere between 2 and 3% of their annual turnover. That's a huge number. That can make the difference between staying in business or getting out of business, or being forced out of business because you don't have the profit margins in place to sustain your food service facility or your operation. So you need to find ways of doing that. There's another interesting statistic I just read the other day, and I didn't put it in here, that there was a study done in Sweden. I don't know if anyone saw this or not. It was a study done in Sweden that talked about waste disposal and compared it to the UK in particular, but some other countries around the world as well. In Sweden, only 5% of their waste actually goes to a landfill. Okay, goes to a landfill site. Guess what it is in this country? Any wild ass guesses? 65? No, not that high. 40%. 40% goes to a landfill site. So 5% to 40%. In Sweden, it's just absolutely, they've turned it into how they recycle and what they do over there is absolutely amazing in comparison to this country and other countries around the world. In fact, the UK sends a tremendous amount of waste over to Sweden, and Sweden charges them, I think the number, if I read, close to 60 pounds a metric ton to ship it to Sweden, and Sweden processes it, and the net result is that when I say process, they recycle, they reuse, they do all sorts of things to waste over there. And again, the net result is only 5% of their waste actually goes into landfill sites, which is without a doubt the lowest of any country that I'm familiar with or have read about anywhere in the world. So I guess the moral of the story is if you put your mind to it, as a country and as well as an industry, then you can find ways to significantly reduce the amount of waste, food waste in particular, that, excuse me, is as a net result of, I'll call it poor operations or poor management within the food service industry. So, moving on, how to prevent the food waste hierarchy. Well, you obviously want to prevent as much waste as you absolutely possibly can, okay? So that's why it's at the very, very top of this particular triangle. And the farther you go down the triangle, is you have least favorable options. So the higher up with this reverse triangle, you really want to be as much as you absolutely possibly can. And it's only at the very, very end, at the very bottom down here, when you actually get rid of it, like Sweden, 5% of it. Excuse me, so prevention of waste is very, very important. And there's a lot of different ways how you can prevent waste. Can you name some at all? Actually, if you think back to your CFSP program, the seminar, there's lots of ways of doing it.
Ordering and preparing shopping.
Exactly. One of the things is you can order your product in already pre-prepared, already pre-cut. I'll give you a great example. Some of you may have heard this when I gave the CFSP program, but I was doing research a couple years ago on actually food waste within the industry in North America. And a huge hotel in Chicago, one of the largest, one of the oldest, very prestigious hotel in Chicago. I've become sort of chummy with the executive chef because I used him for a lot of different research projects I work on in the industry. And so I went in there to do the study, interview him, talk about the study, and I said, so Chef Stephen, what is the, what percentage of your waste, food waste, is generated from pre-consumer versus post-consumer? And he said, pre-consumer, it is just almost negligible, absolutely negligible. And I said, what about food scraps and so on and so forth? He says, we hardly have any. And I said, how did you accomplish that? He orders everything already pre-cut. Not only is it pre-cut, but he gets it pre-cut to a certain size, a certain weight, a certain shape. Right? So hypothetically, you could take a cucumber. We're all familiar with cucumbers. And he would order X number of kilograms of cucumbers in the shape of a star. There's machines out there that you chop it up and make it into a star shape. Or anything he wants. Yes, it costs a lot more money, but he makes it up on significantly less labor costs associated with cutting it by hand or mechanically inside the facility. And he also makes it up on not having to dispose of a tremendous amount of food waste associated with cutting it, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that, prevention of waste. One of the biggest areas that food waste is generated is post-consumer, okay? Post-consumer food waste. And what you can do is manufacturers or dealers, distributors, and there's programs out there, the biggest cause of post-consumer waste, especially in the hotel environment, is doing terrible forecasting of how much food you really need. Because in most countries around the world, once that food goes out, it cannot be used again. Once the food is put out on the table, like in a buffet or something of that nature, at the end of the buffet, bingo, it's got to be disposed of. It cannot be recycled or reused again and given to other consumers. So better forecasting of what people or what people are going to be eating or consuming is a huge, huge factor associated with prevention of waste. Is just doing better forecasting. Okay, it just makes sense. So that means you've got to take a look at technology, which is one of the 15 pains that I mentioned first thing this morning. Take a look at technology, how that can solve some of these types of issues that I've got mentioned up here. And also prepare your product for reuse as well. How can you do that? How can you prepare your product for reuse when you're preparing food? What are some of the things you think you can do?
Chill it down.
Pardon me?
Chill it down.
Chill it out?
Chill it down or freeze it or something.
Yeah, you can do that. What else? Any ideas?
Menu design?
Pardon me?
Menu design.
Yes. Design your menu so that you significantly reduce your food waste. One other thing you can do as well.
Make it really tasty.
Make it what?
Really tasty. So
Make it really tasty so people eat it all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Less grease on the plate.
There you go. Another thing you can do as well, if you're making, I don't know, a huge, huge bowl of something, whatever that something might be, an egg salad or chicken salad, it doesn't make any difference. Don't put that, if you've got a buffet style restaurant, don't put that huge bowl out. Because remember I said at the end of the day or the end of the serving period, if it's not consumed, it's got to be thrown away, right? So make it in a big bowl, but then distribute it in a series of smaller bowls. So when you do that, you constantly put a series of smaller bowls out there. You only put out a bowl when it's absolutely needed. So you're actually giving the consumer less food in one particular bowl to eat from or choose from, but you have a series of other smaller bowls behind it. So you're just constantly moving your inventory versus putting it all out in one big, huge bowl or a series of larger bowls. Make sense? Okay, what I tried to describe there. So that's how you can do that. Prepare for reuse as much as possible. Recycle. What you're seeing now is food service operators. They are, when I say recycling, they're taking some food scraps that have not been issued to the consumer and grinding them all up and turning them into sauces or soups and things of that nature. There's a couple of companies manufacturers that make machines that do an incredible job of macerating almost to a liquid state, in some cases a liquid state, various food scraps that you would normally throw away. Stems of broccoli, for example, or pieces of carrots that don't meet a certain grade or size or shape or whatever. All sorts of different things that you can do, and just find a way to recycle it as much as you absolutely possibly can. And then recovery as much as you can along the same way. So there's actually a movement out there among chefs around the world. How many have heard of discard to delicious? Anyone heard that phrase before? There are competitions that exist out there in the chefdom world, and I'm not just talking in Europe or the UK or Canada or the United States or whatever, but a growing number of chefs that exist out there that have entered into this discard to delicious mindset. And they have competitions amongst themselves as to what can we do, what can we create that is very, very delicious that we would normally discard or throw away. Okay, so that's the movement that is started, and it's gaining more and more momentum all the time. So if you haven't heard of it before, check into it. I'm familiar with one website, or not a website, a blog site, I should say, that basically, no pun intended, caters to this, and it certainly is a way to significantly reduce your waste problem. So again, this goes back to one of the 15 pains that we talked about earlier this morning, is food waste. Alrighty, how do we eliminate it as much as we possibly can, or reduce it as much as we possibly can, and taking on this attitude? It's all about planning. Okay, it's really, really all about planning as to how to go about reducing it as much as possible. When you take a look at this statistic right here, pardon me, food waste costs UK restaurants anywhere between 2 and 3% of their annual turnover or annual sales. That is a huge, very, very significant number. And if we can find ways to, us can find ways to deal with it, then that, excuse me, that only serves the industry as a whole very, very well. Okay. Any questions on food waste at all?